right, Armaan, thank you for joining us. We've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now. We've got quite a few things that we'd love to discuss with you. We've been doing our research actually, and we can see that you've built such an extensive LinkedIn profile. But we want to come back to that a bit later on. For now, for ourselves, for the audience, take us through a bit of your earliest context, your kind of childhood, upbringing, cultural background, and help us understand those things and how they shaped you today.
Yeah, well, no, first of all, thanks so much again for having me. It's a real pleasure as well, and I'm glad to contribute to something that's at its early stage. It's always good to see youngsters like try and grow something. So yeah, keep it up, guys. So yeah, in terms of like my early childhood and development, I guess I'll go through like where I grew up, and then I'll let you lead the way as well in terms of where you want to steer things. But I actually was like born in the UK, but brought up largely until like, my formative years in West Africa, so Nigeria, in Lagos. So that I think growing up in a place like that, you sort of get to see when you're older how different parts of the world are. I guess as a 7-year-old, seeing how deprived a country can be relative to some place like the UK, which is where I ended up moving after I was 7, and being a Sikh Indian as well. Then growing up in the UK, I also like noticed like the differences in cultures and nationalities in different parts of the world. Largely at the time that was UK and Nigeria. In terms of how that sort of shaped my perspective, I think Nigeria, being so young and seeing that difference whenever I went back and forth, made me understand like how privileged it is to live in a place like the UK relative to a third world country. So I think that really grounded me in my early years. So I think, yeah, that was really the sort of start of where I started to develop certain character traits and personalities, which started to shape me as I got older through growing up in the UK towards my later years.
And so did you go through your schooling early on in Africa as well? And when you moved, was there much of a difference did you see there?
In terms of like noticing what kind of difference you're referring to, as in like on the academic sense, in like the atmosphere around me?
Both, I guess, like how the education system there kind of worked compared to moving to England, and how like the environment, the different people that
Yeah, the interactions. Yeah, I mean, well, so when I was in Nigeria, I went to an American school. So I guess I quickly started to realize the differences between American schools and British schools in terms of curriculum style. And I wouldn't say there was really like a preference because I was so young at the time. But as I started to grow up into my, I guess, teenage years, that's when I started to realize, okay, there are personality traits that are quite different in terms of formalities for British versus maybe in certain contexts in schools, less so in the US, in American schools where it comes to like attire and things like that, which I guess I'll never know the difference because I grew up in the British system in my latter years. But I guess it was more so, I guess the foundations, you had more structure and more routine, and there was, I guess, more, I wouldn't say strict, but differences in the way that things operated. So yeah, and in terms of like atmosphere and I guess growing up in the different environments, in Nigeria you had to be in a car all the time, whether it was sometimes in a bulletproof car because there's some places you're going to that are not as safe, which thankfully I guess my family never really took me there, but there was a backup for those situations. Or being stuck in ridiculous traffic in Nigeria because there's been, I mean, not necessarily a coup at the time at my period, but there may have been like floods and those things which don't really happen in the UK, which you take for granted for places like third world countries. So those little things were something that I sort of picked up on over time, which sort of made me feel more appreciative growing up as a child in the UK, especially when I went back and forth to visit my family who spent time in Africa.
Yeah, well, I think you just touched on it there, but it was something that when I was going through your LinkedIn profile, which I must just highlight, on looking through that 8 distinct industries that you've been a part of across 11-year time span since you finished high school. And I think just that in itself is crazy. I think so many people would be frightened away from changing career path once, let alone to be doing it so many different times, and not just jumping into a neighbouring position or business, but completely jumping ship. And you just spoke on it there. And I noticed I came across your apprenticeship that you did for the Thai company in Nigeria. So how strong is the link with you? Obviously, you did most of your growing up in the UK with earlier stages in Nigeria, but yeah, how closely is the linkage back to Western Africa for you and your family?
Oh yeah, so for West Africa, this is actually, so it's my father who moved there when he was, I guess, in his early 20s. So he set up that business, which was something I was lucky enough to sort of support him with whenever I had the chance going back as a teenager. And he was, I guess, to give a bit of like backstory for him, he went with a small amount of money to try and set up something there, and him and my uncle decided to invest in the country as an idea for what they wanted to build. And there were some days where the stories he tells me are things like he was literally, I think one night he couldn't get a hotel room when he first moved there, and he had to literally sleep on the street one night and had to like scavenge his way to find where there's places to eat which were open at like midnight. And some people were fortunate enough to take him in one night and actually like support him, and he slowly managed to find his way and make his way up to be able to sort of commercialize in the country and set up his businesses and things. He eventually then, I guess, in terms of the ties for us, although his relationship is largely with the UAE now as well, it was something for him at the time, which and me, his ability to sort of like allow me to train and learn a little bit about how the country operates, the major differences in the way that you operate an African business versus a traditional business in the Western world, whether it's dealing with people or it's dealing with the way sales is completed or operationally managing a team. So, those were just high level skills that sort of allowed me to build into my career going forward that I sort of understood and was able to build on going forward.
You briefly mentioned your heritage link to back to India and being Sikh Indian as well. How much was that a part of your life growing up, and how much were you connected to your culture growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I think when I was so young, I never really sort of saw myself as like too different or dissimilar, despite wearing a turban or a puggaree. And what we call a patka, which is like the smaller version, as you may know. So I would say like there was, of course, that natural distinctive difference in the way you look. But growing up, I think I was fortunate to be around a community of people which were very supportive. Also, being the tallest in my group definitely helped, by the way. Like people get more intimidated when you have more height, which is a thing that I now understand, because I now see people who are much taller than me, and I'm like, okay, now I see when I was a kid what people looked up to. So yeah, so I think there I never faced any like negative instances, rarely, but it often actually played in my favor because you become someone who's more memorable, you're more recognizable, and it actually worked in my favor, I think, in the most part. So
obviously, you speaking to how you felt quite comfortable growing up in who you were and your identity, and obviously, unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of people who might have physical or psychological differences. So I guess, and you really posed a great shift of lens on how to actually think of that in being more memorable and stuff. So is there anything you can take out from your growing up, with physical differences and differing religious beliefs to where you're based out of the UK, that you can pass on to maybe people of our age, but probably more specifically people a few years younger than us, still going through high school, who might be facing, these racial prejudices on varying levels, daily, weekly, and how that can compound and obviously affect them quite negatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that, because of course my time was never perfect. I've had instances very, very minor. I think it's always useful to look within rather than looking external, and facing those negative pressures from people around you which are pushing you, let's say, in certain directions which you feel are wrong, whether it's in the classroom or if it's even taken in the workplace, right? I think it's acknowledging where you where you actually can make an impact and how to actually like hold your ground in some way. But I think the ultimate test is really you within yourself being able to sort of not necessarily suppress the emotion, but acknowledge that it exists and understanding for yourself, what can I action from this? Because it's difficult to then say that you're going to put up your hand and go against, let's say it's your boss or a group of people around you. But sometimes it can be actually negatively impacting you even more. So it's going to be tactical with how you almost go about the situation, but I think deeply going within yourself to say, why am I doing this for myself? Am I able to, I guess, in those instances where you're, let's say, facing hardship, try and almost center yourself to understand that, this is my identity and I have a reason to believe it. And whether it's going back to your parents and understanding that root, the more you can strengthen those roots, the more confidence I feel you can hold yourself up going forward as to why you're doing certain things. And I think that's the approach or lens that I look at to sort of ensure that you're feeling more whole, I guess, in those instances where maybe people face difficulty.
It's obviously through that difficulty that you find independence and success like you have. What would you say, like, the first time you kind of felt that kind of independence in yourself and, you felt ambition for something, greater, like during your early years? Yeah, throughout that period, where did you first see that, do you think?
Yeah. No, I can already pinpoint one specific instance. I remember, so going into my A-levels, which I think in Australia, is it the same, or you IB? Or do you have what? HSC.
Different
Okay.
states, so
Yeah, fine. Okay, cool. So in my case, I was, how should I backtrack this? I'm trying to think the best way to structure the story. So when I was 17, I actually, at the time, was sort of diagnosed with ADHD and sort of had difficulties and things like that. And also at the time, I'd broken up with my girlfriend. So I went through a lot of like emotional changes during that period, which are quite turbulent in the way that I was operating. So I ended up thinking in my head, okay, I feel more switched on because of the medication I was taking and things like that. And unfortunately, even though I was thinking I was working harder and being more focused, the grades that I ended up getting after my upper sixth or final exams for university were 3 Cs. So I actually failed to get into my top choice uni, which was Warwick at the time, and my insurance, which was UCL. So my firm choice was economics at Warwick. My insurance was UCL social sciences with quantitative methods, and I failed to get into both. And to me, I was upset. I was naturally, I did at some point during those exam periods feel like I hadn't done justice, but it was quite difficult then when you see all your friends going to incredible unis like Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge, and you're there in my house. I probably performed the worst. So that was really difficult, and I think I went through quite a tough period emotionally. But and even my counselor, who was from my school, was saying I wouldn't recommend redoing your A-levels because we don't think it would be within your aptitude to probably try and redo the exams based on how you performed generally throughout the last 2 years. And to myself, I thought I was capable, and I felt that within myself. Even my parents, they doubted me for a certain period, but still I convinced them and gave them that confidence that I do feel like I can achieve. So fast forward to the following academic year. This would now be September of 2017 or 18. And I reapplied to some sixth form colleges, got into one in particular, which was Ashbourne College. And I literally told myself, I remember I was watching one podcast of someone it was a TED Talk actually, and I think he might actually be from Australia, but I could be wrong. He had this routine of waking up every day at 4:30 in the morning. And I was like, I have 9 months where I have no new friends from the school, so I can just focus on my work. I just want to have the outcome of getting into my unis. Regardless of what it is, I'm aiming for the top scores. And I ended up following that routine of waking up at 4:30 and going for a run. So I just restructured my life a little bit for the next 9 months. I said, this is my outcome, get into uni, and I want to just improve my life in general. So I structured a routine where I was waking up at 4:30, going for a run for like half an hour to an hour every single day, coming back, having a cold shower, eating like the same porridge oat breakfast every day, try to learn a new subject, or within a new subject, either it was Mandarin or investing or psychology. And I was building these skills because when I was reading my A-levels, I was learning the same stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I kind of know it, but I want to still learn something new. After school, then I would come back, do like a 20-minute exercise workout, then have my dinner and go to bed, typically. That was like the cycle. And during the weekends, I would still not really socialize as much, maybe a little bit, but the main focus was just going gung-ho on my exams, just focusing on that for a prolonged period of time because I had 9 months just to knuckle down. And that process of just constantly pushing myself to try and get better at the different subjects. So I did economics, psychology, economics, physics, and maths. And by the end of it, that whole experience of me trying to push my boundaries and doing as best as I can, I ended up getting into Warwick when I reapplied. So that was where I got into the same place that rejected me the first time around. I got in the second time. And I think to me that was just a full testament to like just pushing through and focusing on something. And the fact that I was independent enough to make those decisions about how I structured my day, my time in school, and my routine, it really just provided me a lot more confidence going forward. So that's the long story of a answer to what you mentioned.
I saw a post on your LinkedIn, and it kind of reflects what you've just spoken about there, and I thought I'd read it out to you. You wrote, 2 years ago today, I failed to obtain the necessary grades for my chosen university. Despite that, I persuaded my parents that I had the abilities to go to university, and those who thought I should move on and go to private university go through clearing or work. I chose otherwise, and now here I am at the exact first choice university, the same that I failed to get into the first time round. My advice to anyone who has failed to get into their chosen university, resilience and perseverance, can change all of that. Now that you've gone through the journey already, you're one step ahead. If you know inside you have the abilities, don't let yourself go by and take a chance if you can, financially and willingly. Looking back on that, do you want to add anything onto that? And, it's cool to hear you say that story, and would you add anything on to that now for today's people who, like for us, we've just finished high school.
Yeah.
For those people who, might have just missed out on that chance.
Oof. It's odd looking back on that because now that's nearly like 7 years ago, I think? 6 years ago. 6 years ago. Okay, wow. So it would have been, if I posted that 6 years ago, then it would be 8 years since the actual time that I reapplied. I think the one thing that I've now picked on growing up as like an adolescent and going beyond that into a young adult, the preferences of things you enjoy doing sometimes will shift. And, if I, let's say, spent that summer maybe reflecting a little bit more about what I wanted in my life, I think the story might be completely different. I at the time always had interest in psychology, more so necessarily than economics and things like that. So I think I was so zeroed in on the goal of getting into that university and into that degree that I had no other target. But sometimes if you give yourself a little bit of that wiggle room, maybe I would have chosen to do my insurance choice, which was still a great university. It was UCL doing social sciences, but that may have been more of an interest to me. And I think reflecting a little bit more at a younger age, I think can also really help, as long as you don't go too wide, because that can also be a problem, right? If you think, do I want to do medicine or do I want to do, French literature? Like there are extremes to it, but as long as you have a rough idea within yourself, what do I really prefer? And you can try and answer yourself and ask your why and bring that out to you. I think you'll have more success in the long run when you actually end up pursuing, let's say, a degree and then ultimately a career, etc., and things you like. And those things can also evolve. So you don't have to have the right answer immediately. But as long as you're doing what you feel internally is more of an interest is to you. So that'll be my advice as well. Not just focusing on what you didn't get, but knowing really what you want at the end of the day.
And you've spoken quite a lot on just how central university was for you in terms of, your trajectory in education. And I really just want to touch on just how embedded that was for you was it more of a family thing? Was it a society community thing? Was there also accesses of, schooling pressure? Like, how much did you even think about diverting from that road towards a professional career through the tertiary education? And yeah, obviously, you've spoken to how University of Warwick was just that goal that you'd had for years.
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's something that increasing people are now talking about it, but back when I was in university, it was not really, it was like an expectation. And I think, this may be contrarian to a lot of people my age may say, not sure, but I personally don't know if university is right for the majority of people. I think we all have our differences in where we operate, which we can discover through university, but if we can find out earlier, which I think naturally society will have this tendency, but people who are 16, 17, 18 may know, is university right for me, or is going straight into working corporate or a startup better? And for me, maybe that would have been a better choice. I could have learned through an incubator, like a startup incubator, about how to commercialize in business, and that may have been a better choice. So I would say, yeah, I had definitely a lot of influence. When you see all your friends going to great universities, that you will often want to follow the crowd and feel like you're not missing out. And I know even some people who have ended up going down that corporate route, and they are like 5 years ahead of most people when it comes to their career. Now, they did, of course, miss out on that social life, which may be, better or worse for some, but they're also really content in their career, and that's allowed them to pivot, and again, everyone has their own timeline, no need to rush anything, but there are, of course, there are differences in the ways you can approach that period in your life, whether you end up going into academics or working as well.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot of, and as you spoke to, it is very recent as to, and probably stemming from over the last couple of years, especially probably since COVID and the world reopening up, just the percentage of probably dissatisfaction in what undergraduate students and stuff, particularly seen by the parents, who are probably taking on that loan, dissatisfaction in the outcomes that are, we're seeing in tertiary education. And obviously it's worked out perfectly for you, I think, in what you did as follows. But and it was something that you mentioned there as well, that it isn't for everyone. And we're hearing that a lot these days across entrepreneurship. You mentioned it there in tertiary and a bunch of other sectors. So I just want to, I don't know, I guess just clarify for us, who are still considering university for sure, and a lot of the audience at home, what type of person do you think is a better suitor to needing or should go to university versus someone who can probably take alternative paths that are increasing in popularity?
Great question. I think for someone who is more considering a route in the, let's say, entrepreneurial space, in their 18, well, they're like 17, 18 years old right now, as opposed to uni, I would say there's a lot of tenacity, and you have to, I feel, know within yourself that you're capable of being able to push through in one of two ways. Either you can go down a route of going to work within an incubator or some kind of structure that allows you to get support in order to get the necessary skills to start up a business. Or if you feel like you've already developed and you're confident in yourself that you've developed the knowledge that you need in order to, let's say, pursue and set up a small business, by all means, you can do that. It could be, let's say, you learn through using any of these AI models, how should I set this up? And you have that understanding of building an infrastructure and getting, let's say, some kind of support, like a mentor, to guide you around that route. Then there is, of course, that, desire. And if you are, disciplined and you know that you have tenacity and you're, let's say, somewhat structured in the way that you're operating, then by all means, I think a right person for university may be someone who's still maybe would want something a bit more structured. They still need to understand what they want out of their career, whether it's more in a creative sense, they want to go abstract and maybe go into an arts field, or they want to go into economics and go into working in sales or business, which a lot of people aren't sure about, right? Universities like in the US, you have that first year to still explore as many subjects as you like before you end up actually picking a major. And to me, that can be a better route than going straight into a professional career at very early on. And you can always stop university. No one's saying you have to complete your degree. So I think there are many ways you can look at the situation, and I wouldn't say it's a failure if you drop out as well midway through or after the first year if you have something you're deeply also passionate about that you want to focus on. So,
And you know, you obviously education, has been a big part of your life so far. Economics, finance is something that I'm really interested in, and at the moment, planning to go to university soon back in Australia. How much did your decision to go into that field in university? How much of that was just general interest and interest in the subject? Because I know for me, I'm really interested in learning about those things, economics, finance, and I don't necessarily see myself in a job later on in that field, but it's just the interest in learning those things. I guess how much did that play a part?
yeah. So the narrative I had in my mind about why economics was, I saw it as a social science which sort of blended the best of psychology and business together, because it's not a natural science like physics where you can objectively state, okay, demand and supply curve works this way, and it will always be very precise. Yes, econometrics can get very close, but there's this aspect where you have to understand that, like psychology, you can do tests and you have to constantly get more and more data in order to affirm maybe the correlation between A and B, for example. And of course, there's way more to that, but without getting into the depths of it. Then on the business side, you also have an understanding of how, on the microeconomic side, how a market operates from demand and supply, or from a macroeconomic lens, how the business world will work when you look at, let's say, balance of payments, which even goes into accounting. So I think for me, it had this all-encompassing, at least specifically, I'm talking about economics here, had quite a broad breadth to it, where you have a behavioral economics, which just goes into psychology. You've got the business side of it on the microeconomic side. You've got the mathematical side as well. And then, even accounting comes into it, like I said, with balance of payments. So you've got a very broad brush. And if you look at the type of people that go into those degrees, you'll see that they end up in a wide variety of spaces, whether it's investment banking to consulting, or if it's even going down to work in, downline in market research, or even into industry-specific roles, because it gives you quite a broad breadth of experience. And I think that's one reason why I chose it. The second as well was the problem-solving side of it, where it actually teaches you how to look at a problem and understand how best to position yourself to tackle that problem, both whether it's mathematically on a data-specific question, or qualitatively on how to answer something that's a bit more subjective, like government policy and how that's going to impact the outcome of a country. So I think the wide spectrum of what economics gave you was the reason I chose it, as well as its balance of business and psych. So, yeah.
Well, I think what I really wanted to touch on, and you kind of found it and were able to make a really decisive decision within that, because you felt it blended those few subjects. And I think, the issue for a lot of people is that they're still relatively unsure within themselves and that their professional career to come. And it's the protection that education stuff has given them 13 years prior up until that point, that they feel they have to kind of go through university just so they can feel secure in going towards a common goal and then having something on the end of that. And you spoke to the breadth, obviously, that economics, an economics degree or finance can offer. So I don't know if, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what advice or tips could you give to people finishing up their last years of high school, to thinking back at their journey through school, to looking at their hobbies and their key interests as to building the makeup of tertiary career paths?
So is your question then more on how one should look at what they've done in the extracurricular side when deciding on university, or maybe you can
Extracurricular and within school as well. So just, what subjects were they doing? What key elements and concepts within those subjects did they enjoy? And I know obviously for a lot of kids, school in general is quite difficult, and that's completely understandable. But there's still a lot of reason and moments of experience that can come from that can build and craft that idea of, a potential tertiary degree. And you spoke, I think extracurricular stuff outside of schooling is really important and can be key pedestals to finding out, what your future self could look like. But yeah, kind of both.
Yeah. So one thing that I'll definitely, mention is your degree also isn't your be all and end all. By picking that one subject, you're not like bound to do that thing indefinitely. You still, like for example, although my mother steered me more to economics as opposed to psychology, like you may understand like South Asians where we're more like, oh, beta, go and do business as opposed to going and doing psychology, you'll get a better career out of it. And she has some credit to it, right? Because if you really enjoy that subject, you can read around it. You can learn in your spare time. And that may end up actually being something you go down the route of. Maybe if you are deeply passionate about psychology and you wanted to go down more a psychiatric route, you'll realize after the first year of your degree, you're like, wow, I am reading more about psychology than I am about economics. And if you're, you often will have some credits you can take for subjects outside. And I think, take that as like an extracurricular activity. Let's say you go down and join Psychology Society and things like that, and you become deeply embedded there. That can always lead you down that route. So I think look at what you're doing outside of school for sure, whether it's different subjects or it's different sports, and lean into it. And for sure, it can then be complementary to your main degree as well. So that's something that I think can also present some indication as to how you will then end up actually pursuing your future career going forward.
What did university teach you outside of outside of the subject theory, like the other skills that you picked up along the way, like time management, those kind of things?
Yeah. So university taught me, one thing I kind of appreciated, but I think I never figured out until I was in my mid-20s, when the value of the people that you meet. Like, if I look back, I think I was grateful that I ended up naturally just being a very people-centric person, where I enjoyed being a part of multiple societies and joining different clubs and sports. But you'll never know who you're sitting next to in your classroom, and I think that's something that has always sat with me. I've been with people who, in fact, they may end up listening to this, but they've become VPs in their banks within the fastest rate possible, and some people have gone into private equity houses, being the youngest ever analyst to join that particular house. And I think you got to give them credit, is that you will only see the outcome of the people that you're around probably further in your career. So appreciate everyone that's around you, and you never know where they may end up and where they could support you down the line. And I think that was definitely one area. The second thing in terms of like time management and going into like productivity side, I will say I'll caveat this, but you have a lot more time than you think you have generally in your life. And there was a good phrase that I learned actually from someone in school, and their phrase is, you ultimately decide where you allocate your time, as opposed to you believing that, I've got all these commitments, so I can't add. You can remove things from your diary and then add if that's more of a priority to you. So it's not that you don't have enough time, but it's the fact that you're not adding, you're not replacing your time with something else. So, if I'm part of a society, but at the end, on the weekends, maybe I'm going out with friends. Okay, maybe I want to be more productive this weekend, but next weekend I'll go out with friends, and I can maybe every other week we'll go out with them rather than every weekend. Something like that. I'm just giving you a crude example, but making sure that you actually have a priority in how you want to spend your time and what you want to do. that can be really helpful. And the way that someone mentioned to me very recently that I look back on, I never realized I had this focus, was being very outcome focused, where you have to have a reason why you're doing the certain things you're doing. For example, if you wanted to get into, let's say, investment banking, that was a big part of your drive, then what are the things around that subject that, one, why do I want to do it? But then ultimately, what are the things I need to do in order to get to that particular career, and making sure that your outcome is strong enough first, and then building those building blocks around it before you then start putting it into a diary. So you can almost understand the nature of the different things that you want to achieve. That can not just be IB, it can be sports as well, or it could be even something in the, let's say, music space, etc. So I'd say that's one way you could look at that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that clarity. I think not only to us, but a lot of people watching, to try and navigate that period of the latter years of high school, and then mindsets and approaches going into an undergraduate degree potentially. But I just want to fast forward a bit to now post your degree at University of Warwick, and more earlier on into your professional career. I know you're still relatively very young, so this is a bit more recent than what we've been speaking up until this point. But I just want to ask, what beliefs about success or stability did you have in your, a few years ago that you now think on differently, and how would you I don't know, I guess, be able to try and translate that back to people who are going through a university degree or just finishing and have all these wild expectations and stuff that they're seeing online or through different influences in their life?
I think there are two things that I already pick up on from that. And the first is not being very externally focused on the outcome of what you're achieving, but more being internally focused. And by that, I mean, you can say that, okay, I want to get promoted in my career, I want to go set up a business, and I want to do all these things, but it goes back to understanding yourself first and really having your internal indicators and drivers of success. Because if you're looking at other people around you and saying, oh my God, I want to be like this person because they've achieved all these great things in their business, and they're hitting numbers that look really impressive, and that's what I want to look at, and I have that kind of lifestyle. But is that really what you want? Like why do you want those things? And I think the parameter for success shouldn't come from the things around you, but really come from within yourself. And I think in the early stages of a career, it's hard to do because you're developing that internal compass, which is sort of eventually getting aligned to yourself, but it's not something that you're born with. You have to eventually take up information and gather that over time. And I think you've got to be conscious of it as you start to evolve into your career. And I think just always being aware that, am I doing this from an external motive or from something that's really driving me inside? So that would be the first. And remind me the question again. I've stopped this point.
No, I've been lost in your answer. So no, that's great. Well, obviously, as I mentioned before, your plethora of experiences that you've gathered in such a short span of time. You've obviously done some time in Africa, quite a lot through UK. More recently through the Middle East, and a bit of time in India as well. So how do you think your experience from all those different places that are vastly different in a lot of ways from each other has curated that idea of success and just kind of grounding you in what individually for you that idea looks like, and how can you share that to people who might have drastic goals and models and pictures of success that, not to say that they're unachievable or anything, absolutely not, but they can almost just scale that back a bit and just climb that ladder slowly towards maybe what they're looking in their long term.
Yeah, I think the way I like to look at the perspectives now, because I'm actually in a position where I'm looking into the next stages of my career, what I'm doing next. And I mean, I'm sure people have heard this a lot, but just looking at the next small incremental step you can take to achieve, let's say, what someone who you aspire to end up like has taken. So, say someone who's now running a Fortune 500 business and you want to be, let's say, the CEO of that, whether it's started up as a founder in the startup or it's become an industry titan because it's a long-standing conglomerate for the last 250 years, whatever it is, either way. If you look at the people who are in those circles and you really admire what they've created or the person they are and how they hold themselves, look at what is the next incremental step I can take to start to become that person, whether it's the traits they have or it's the career they've taken and their journey, whether you can see, openly on LinkedIn what people have done in their career. There could be some routes people, such as myself, where I change industry a lot to pivot in order to find something that I'm really aspiring and have energy for, and I, let's say, enjoy the work that I'm doing, or someone who's very structured in the way they're operating. They have operational excellence in the way that they're doing things, and they've climbed the career ladder in order to end up there. So I think it's just knowing what that incremental step is, and that can be either through mentorship or just, looking at people's careers themselves.
Take us a bit through, what you have done with your previous businesses, and how important do you think it is to, adventure and explore different areas and industries?
Yeah, I think to me, from a personality trait, I really did not know what I wanted to do, right? And doing economics, I think, is an indicator for someone who does not know what they want to do in some way as well. And then consulting is more of an indicator that you really do not know what you want to do. So those three parallels, you're like, holy shit, like you could be going from education as an industry to like pharmaceuticals, because that's the variety of spaces that you're looking at within those subjects and careers. So I think it's definitely important if you're someone who really doesn't have a specific passion to find out what that is, because when you're younger you have a bit more mobility over your time and your energy, and you can spend that a lot more freely. And as you start to get older and you have more commitments and things, whether it's family or otherwise, you then may not have the capacity. And I think that's something which I probably took for granted when I was younger, and that's probably also one reason why I ended up exploring a lot more in my careers and changing, and also doing, let's say, side hustles and external hobbies and things like that. So I think it's really important, because you'll never know what you truly like if you've not explored the subject. Just to give you a crude example, I've got a friend who's in the art industry, and I think, to me, I only went to an event really recently, and hearing his story, I really admired the career path and what they've been able to create from that space. And I don't think, without meeting people and spending my time to explore, would I have really found that. And I think Dubai actually is a place that, without going off topic too much, has given me that privilege to be able to explore a lot more, given the city.
Going into a bit more nitty-gritty, your current business, Pronto Pay, I think Jai has more to speak on it than I do, but for those who don't know, give us a little, a simple explanation on what you do now and where your focus is now.
Sure. So Pronto Pay, we're a payments business. We essentially convert currencies for businesses and individuals at more competitive rates than banks globally. So we compete with the likes of Revolut, Wise, when it comes to the FX, but rather than being a banking solution, like Revolut, for example, now, we're just what's called a payment service provider. So we can convert and hold those funds and not provide necessarily interest on those funds, but we hold them in a more secure account, technically, than banks necessarily, and purely focus on the conversion. That's where we make our money. So that's the business.
What traits do you think, now that you're, is it 2 to 3 years into co-founding Pronto Pay? Is that about correct?
Just over 2 years.
What traits do you think, gathering the plethora of experience as in your professional life post your undergraduate degree, what do you think are the most important traits that has given you into co-founding your own business? And how have you taken that into the establishment and now growth stages of that business, and even on an outlook into what's in the near and long future for you in the business?
Yeah, so I think when I look at my career, I would say being in a career like consulting, you can look at problems in so many different ways. whether it's looking at how to optimize to grow a company. So within the existing FX business, just to give an example, we wanted to figure out how do we grow faster, right? And we were initially doing it through cold outreach, whether it was by email or otherwise. And we, at some points, realized how are we going to attend to the most attractive customer to our business? And we essentially broke down that data. And with the experience of consulting, we could actually figure out, okay, through the cold calling, which ones were, or cold outreach, which ones were the ones that ended up, converting more into meetings, and which ones converted to leads, which ones got more revenue. And that breakdown of data was something that we learned in consulting, both my business partner and I, and he was in the private equity space as well, to actually focus on certain segments and certain industries that were more lucrative for us. That was one. The second, I'd say, is even presenting and delivering things. In consulting, we had to prepare presentations for FTSE 500 businesses, and although at my young stage in my career, I may have not presented it directly to the CEO at times, probably lower staff within the business, but we still learned that communication skill to our partners and directors, and even at times to stakeholders within the management of the companies we worked with. And that delivery and that confidence and that approach is in somewhat actually also sales. So you may not pick up on certain things you're building in your career in the early stages, but they actually may end up supporting you in ways you may not realize down the line. So that's just some examples of the things that we picked up on. I'm happy to touch on more, but yeah.
Yeah, well, on doing a bit of research into your Pronto Pay business, I did notice you kind of headline yourselves around a 50% cost savings guarantee. I don't want to get too much into that, but I do want to just dive into kind of what is it actually like, and what are the pressures that you feel to kind of try and uphold a guarantee like that, given it's such a competitive and growing market internationally?
So, the reason why we made that approach was because we know that in the UAE it's a very price sensitive market. So that was one data point we picked up on very quickly, and was the reason we presented that. And I think the thing that we're trying to focus on now moving forward is, marketing that service to get people to know our brand and brand reputation, especially in a competitive market like the UAE, which is starting to grow with Revolut now, even recently opening up their offices here. And we're, of course, a much more boutique player where they're focusing on mass market, where we will directly have relationship managers with our clients and things. But yeah, I think knowing what your customer wants and being attuned to what they will need down the line is something that you'll pick up on through the data you can collect through the existing customers and the feedback you're getting through trying to acquire new ones that you can then develop in order to sort of outcompete in some way in the market.
So, and another thing I saw is on Trustpilot, I can see that you've got a 4.2 to 4.5 star rating. How important is, like reputation and that trust with your clients in growing what you've built?
I would say that number one, it's your clients are literally everything. Like without your business would be nothing without your customers, right? So I think especially in the early stages, harnessing those relationships as much as you can to build up upon them, and then building that trust with them before you also, because they're ultimately the people who've allowed you to sort of plant the seed. Without their acceptance to your company to try you out, let's say in your business, you wouldn't maybe be able to scale to the next level necessarily. And often those people will be the people I feel from looking 2 years on who will support you when things maybe don't go so well, whether maybe they'll use your services more, try to refer you to more clients. And if they've enjoyed your service, then they'll post, let's say, reviews for you, or they'll be more willing to support the nature in which you're operating. And I think that's why it's crucial to ensure that you are attuned with your customers and constantly actually being in touch with them.
How have you done that? Whether it be through CRMs or meeting with them personally. How have you maintained that relationship?
So CRMs definitely, I think they're of course a great system. Most companies I'd say are using them, and it allows you to have a cadence with ensuring that you're always timely with checking in on your customers, making sure they're always actively trading, monitoring when, let's say, someone isn't as active to get someone from your team or yourself directly to get in touch. And having a structure around how you also do it most efficiently is also very helpful. So let's say that you're scaling where you've got about 500 clients, and you of course won't have time to attend to every single one, but you want to choose the ones which are adding most value to your company to give more time to. So you may meet those more in person than the others. So, of course, that may be a very simple way to look at things, but then knowing also how frequently you meet the other ones and get them, at least giving them that time to feel like they're valued in the early stages before maybe expanding to more mass market. So.
And why choose Dubai and the UAE to be based out of to, pursue and follow that business venture for you going into the future?
Yeah, so I think Dubai has been really good to us as a business. Not only from a tax perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, but the nature in which people are willing to sort of connect and do business here is far more than most places I've been to globally. Whether I look at places like Singapore or the UK, it's difficult to get in the door with people who are business owners or founders or even just executives within the bigger entities here. So that was something that made it much more attractive and allowed us to both want to acquire more customers and also be willing to get in that door more. Because sometimes it just takes one ear to just listen to what you have to offer for them to then start to use your platform, build you that credibility, and then allow you to grow much faster. So, yeah.
Well, after looking at what you've already built, how do you now decide what's worth your time and energy? And how does that then go into what your travel schedule and stuff looks like, being based out of Dubai, which is a very international kind of hub for businesses?
I have figured out how to use my gut a little bit more for the first time. I think as a 26-year-old, it's something that I think when you're younger, it's probably harder to develop, and I feel like I always question myself a lot. But just trusting my own instinct to know, is this worth my time? Is it not? And I think when you start to have that trust and confidence within yourself, you naturally have a tendency to make choices, whether they're right or wrong, but maybe it is the right choice and I'll go down the right path, or not. I will learn and then end up moving to then make the better decision going forward. Because when you have no one who's accountable to you as a founder, you have to trust that my future, which I don't know yet, will ultimately dictate the rest of that journey going forward into the prolonged future. So, yeah.
And with what you're building now and where we are, we're so lucky to be here in such a a hub for business and networking and whatever. What excites you about your future, not only personally, not only for the business, but personally as well?
I think to me, what I felt more excited about, and whether this sort of journey of what we've discussed maybe pivots this a little bit, but I think when you've settled a business and it's got a foundation which is growing steady, you still have the option to continue growing it for sure. But like I said earlier, it's also not all in. Like, you don't need to be focusing on just one business consistently the rest of your life. You can explore more options. As long as you have that robust foundation in one, maybe it's worth moving into another as well. As long as you have a right team who are managing it effectively and well. So for me, at least, and given that context, let's see where things go. It could be that I move away from payments to go into something that's more creative. So yeah, and I think that's why it's an exciting journey in terms of where I end up, maybe in a more creative field. But let's see where that takes us.
We try and ask one of our followers, one of our friends, what question they would have for you. The question we kind of got was, how do you personally manage, your finance? How do you look at saving, investing, and especially for people our age, young, saving a little bit every week, investing, things like that. How do you look at that?
I think, okay, depending on how much time you have available to yourself, of course, right? That's one thing. But take a risk if you want, and maybe allocate it depending on your own appetite, right? And depending on your financial capabilities. Dollar cost averaging is something that I think you guys may know of, right? And I think consistently doing that for the rest of your life is incredibly valuable, and you can see much more lucrative outcomes if you, let's say, consistently invest in the S&P over a prolonged period of time, especially as you're 18 to go, by the time you're my age, if you just put in $100, you'd be very well off probably by the time you're my age. And that's something you can very easily do if you have and earning income through a part-time job, for example. Then I would also say, when you start to develop, don't just look at like when you say the word investing, I also look at that in a broader sense. You have more things you can do than just invest. You can invest that into setting up a small side hustle as a business, whether it's photography or it's even a small like in-house bakery in your kitchen, and you're ending up selling goods because you enjoy that, right? Like lean into things you enjoy and invest your time into those things. So consider the finances you have as not just one thing that's to allocate it, but also to allocate it into yourself to maybe grow that wealth in a different way. Because there are many ways you can make money in the world, and I think you'll be surprised whether it's brokering businesses, social media, and yeah. So I'll say that that's one way you can look at that.
It's awesome.
Well, Armaan, thank you so much for coming on. I think just the value in sharing your insight of experience and wisdom is invaluable for people like us and people watching home. So on behalf, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And we covered a lot there, but I think there was really a lot of takeaways to dug in amongst everywhere that we touched on. So yeah, really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, no, pleasure. Thanks so much, guys. And best of luck with the podcast as well.